Okay, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to our May 3rd Thursday Small Town Big Business Series, which is sponsored by the Erie County Gaming and Revenue Authority and coordinated by Impact Corey. I'm Erin Passenger, a board member of Impact Corey. Tonight we have with us Jeff Stempka, a senior associate brand manager at Campbell's Soup Company, who is about to present Consumer Demand Landscapes, how creating customer segments is useful for businesses big and small. Jeff currently leads product innovation and commercialization for the Well Yes soup portfolio and previously led product innovation across the Campbell Condensed Soup and Swanson Broth and Stock portfolios. Prior to this role, Jeff worked in various marketing, strategy, and corporate transformation roles at Tyson Foods, the U.S. Steel Corporation, and Advanced Manufacturing Technology Ventures, LLC. Jeff holds a master's degree in marketing research and consumer behavior from IE Business School in Madrid, Spain, as well as an MBA and bachelor's degrees in marketing and international business from Penn State Barron's Black School of Business. And with that, I'm going to turn tonight's presentation over to Jeff Stempka. And Jeff, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Erin. Thanks, everybody. Really excited to be here. I think like the intro, basically one thing you could probably like pick up is that I just like love learning. So I always loved school and loved everything there. So more so like I've been a lifelong learner, and so I think it's really interesting to be able to to talk with you guys today and just discuss some of the work that I do at Campbell's and some of the learnings that I've had, because one thing that has also been really fun for me as I've grown up in northwestern Pennsylvania is that I had an opportunity to work at a number of organizations, like both big and small. In fact, Brad, one thing that I didn't throw on here is that I did work at Erie Insurance for an internship at Erie Insurance. So a lot of connections there. But I think one of the really cool things to me is that there are a lot of tools that, and I'm going to put this in air quotes, marketers use that are very useful to people that manage a business that it's either one person or 100,000 people. And I want to talk with you all about some of those tools that we use. And so, just in terms of how. Oh, one thing I should also throw out is that I went to Northeast, so luckily we're not in person, so you can't throw like any fruit or vegetables at me. But so as Erin mentioned, I work now currently at Campbell's Soup, worked at Tyson Foods, and then U.S. Steel, and also this like AMTV. It's now called First Link, but it's like a research firm. But basically, through all these experiences and like growing up in the northwestern Pennsylvania area, I've learned a lot about just how there are lots of opportunities to know like consumers and to understand how consumers operate in their own lives. And one of the cool things also that I'll note is that the things that we'll be talking about today are very useful for both business to consumer, either products or service companies, so like consumer goods products, or even like business to business. So these tools that we're talking about, when I worked at US Steel as an example, like we used a lot of these same concepts to basically market and sell to companies that make soup cans, or companies that like Ford Motor Company, they buy steel and then they make it into a truck. And one other thing I would mention is please feel free to just like interject. Like I'm really like a laid back person. I would really prefer to have more of a conversation. So if you have questions or comments, just feel free to like jump right in. This is really informal. I'll also I do have a tendency to get long-winded, so I'll try to like make my presentation move along so we can have time for discussion, either at the end, or like I mentioned, like between like while we're going through here. So at a very high level, want to just tell you about Campbell Soup Company, probably a company that you guys have heard of before. It's been around for 150 years. I won't go too in depth here because the meat and potatoes of this discussion is really just talking with you all and talking about some of these tools. But I do want to give some perspective on Campbell's, because I think it's really important when we're thinking about these different tools that we're going to be discussing. These are tools that are useful for companies that are like a Campbell's Soup Company, like $8 billion, or like an 800,000 or 8,000 if you're just starting up a business and you think, man, like I've sold $800 worth of product or $8 worth of product. These are all tools that are useful and that can help scale businesses. And the other thing that I want to mention, let's say you're a small business owner or you're just starting out or you're thinking about starting a business, these companies that we all buy from, like you think of a Campbell Soup or a Coca-Cola or a Pepsi or even like Google or an Amazon or Apple, like these companies started out as like a one-person operation or maybe a couple of people having a beer together and just coming up with an idea. And now they're these like huge companies. And so scale is something that, obviously is desirable in some sense, but in other senses, maybe it's not. Maybe, the objective is to have a business that has X number of, units sold or X number of dollars sold. Maybe it's something that, is a family operation that you want to pass down to generations. That's awesome. And that's the one thing I think we should all really be open to and to think about is that business objectives are really unique to each individual business, but there are opportunities to think about how we manage our business in different ways. So that's what I want to talk with you guys about today. And at a very high level, I want to talk about, I would say basically three-ish key things. First off, I want to talk about this overall idea of what a demand landscape is. But underneath the demand landscape, I want to talk about what consumer segments are and also what consumer moments are. And again, as we talk about these, just because I'm using the word consumer, like I want to be clear that these are concepts that can be used if there's no consumer, so to speak, involved. Like, so if I'm selling to to like a processing company, or I'm selling a raw material or some sort of component part to, whatever it might be. I'm selling like a component to, an engine manufacturer. These concepts are still very important because at the end of the day, we have a business and we're creating, and we'll talk about this. My business, even if I'm selling to another like business, like I'm creating a brand and I'm creating this idea, right? So even if I sell an actual widget or some sort of like idea or a service, I want people to think of when they think of Jeff's flower shop or Jeff's hardware store or Jeff's, automotive parts company. I want them to think of something, and that could be like quality or service quality, or it could be, on-time delivery. So this idea we'll talk about like a brand also is very important when we're thinking of how we structure our organizations. And again, I'm going to be going through a lot of stuff, so please just feel free to interject. But also, I want to just really thank Aaron and Chuck and Brody, and like for having me today. And also, I already mentioned this, but ground rules, just have fun. Feel free to interrupt and ask questions. I'm really laid back. And then I think a very important warning is that even though I'm a marketer, I am so apologetic and I'm so sorry for like the quality of my slides. I need to improve in making slides that look a little bit more appealing, but that's what we have, like design teams that I get to work with every single day. So at a very high level, I want to think about this idea of, what is a brand? And again, I mentioned before that, I'm using this word brand, and we may think of brands like, Campbell Soup, or we might think of it like, guitar strings, like Elixir guitars, that's a brand, or like I have this like Gripmaster that I, use to play guitar better, or even like a pen, like Sharpie, right? A brand is, this idea. And when we think about like what a brand is, I think you could also insert, what is my company? Like, what does my company stand for? Like, how do I even come across as a person, right? So the truth of it is, like, I technically work in brand management, but even I have sometimes a difficult time like thinking about what a brand is, because a brand means so many different things to so many different people in so many different contexts. And so I want to go through like a quick little exercise with you guys, and it's basically, let's say, like let's look at some iconic brands. And admittedly, these are brands that are pretty well known, and these are brands that are more I'd say like closer to consumers, closer to like end users, and that's okay. We can talk also about brands that aren't like consumer facing, but when we think of like each of these brands, like they mean something to each of us. And so like, I mean, and I don't want to force anybody, but if anybody wants to chime in, if you have a thought of like any of these, like maybe something, means, maybe like Coca-Cola means something to you. And I'll just start off that, I work at Campbell's, but when I was a consumer, and I still am, but when I think of Campbell's, what I think of is like comfort, warmth. I think of, nourishment, and like that's just kind of what comes to life for me when I think of Campbell's. And like the cool thing is that Campbell's is also like branding themselves as an employer. And so when I think of how it feels to work at Campbell's, like now that I work there, I think of also caring, and like I think of like collaborative, and I think of empowering and those types of things. So just want to open it up to the group. Like if anybody wants to jump in, no pressure to do it. But if you want to, any of these brands on the screen, does, just kind of curious what comes to mind.
So I'll jump in, Jeff. This is Brad. So it's, I don't know, fascinating that those, what is there, 8 that are up there. And in my mind, in this politically diverse environment we're in, or society we're in right now, the Nike logo, the Google logo, Facebook, and now Coca-Cola, after all the debacle in Georgia, I just think of political divide. And, Nike's gotten a lot of flack from the NFL and, Facebook and big social media, Google, same thing. And so, not to, again, get political, but those are the things that jump into my mind right off the bat when I look at some of those is community activism or political activism, or whatever you might phrase it, which is probably not their intent, but that's part of their core values. And frankly, it's a brand maybe that's developed that, again, wasn't their intent or wasn't in their mission. But those are some of the things I think about, specifically those right there: Nike, Google, Facebook, and Coca-Cola.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's an incredible point. And to be completely honest with you, Brad, like that didn't even cross my mind. But the way that you, like, that's like the important thing about brands is that, like, to each person, right, they mean something different. I think that's like a really great point, because when we think about, like, if I have my own business, if I have my own brand, like those types of, how am I perceived, and like thinking about how I'm perceived by either, people that purchase my services and products, or people that I want to attract in to buy my products and services. Like those are the sorts of things that I have to think through. And so I think that, the Nike example is actually really interesting, because I think it was pretty clear that, Nike was like an early mover in terms of, standing up for something that was important to them, right? It may be not something that Tropicana or McDonald's would stand up for, right? But, the different industries that they work in or have exposure to, they had to make decisions. And I would say that they like took a hard stance earlier when, maybe it wasn't like palatable to like a broader group of companies. And so I think that's like a really interesting point to bring up, because, like it's actually interesting. I've been in a lot of discussions about Nike in particular in the past like 6 months. And one of the interesting things that is discussed is that, Nike made a very like a very clear decision of where they stood on certain issues, right? And there was a part of their consumer base that kind of fell away, right? But then over time, like studies, or like not studies, like sales data has shown that, people have come back to Nike. It's interesting to talk through like something like Facebook, right? Where you have, these organizations that are navigating what does it mean to be a social media platform? What does it mean to be a publishing house? Like, are those the same things? Are they different? And so I think that those are things that are up for debate, but these are companies that they are finding themselves in a position, through whether or not they prefer to be in those types of decision points, they have to make decisions, right? And so that then comes across on how they're perceived and who's using the platforms. And so I think, Brad, that's like a really good point that that you bring up, is that decisions and how brands and how companies react or are proactive in certain issues on certain topics really has a long-term impact on how people perceive them, like how other competitors perceive them. So it's just a really interesting dynamic. And I think, like, the other thing is that you talk about, people that are political or not political, or people that are, right in the middle. Like what about, musicians, like their brands as well? And like, what about, authors and just subject matter experts and like artists? And so the reason why I'm kind of throwing this on its head is to say, like, everything can be a brand. And I think it's also important to think about, like towns, cities, manufacturing organizations. Like these are like companies that may not necessarily sell anything to a consumer, but it's very important for them to just be mindful of how they're perceived. The thing more importantly than like thinking about how it's important for them to be perceived is this idea that, thinking of like a brand, thinking of like what a brand architecture is, helps to orient companies like on how they do business. And so we think about things like, a mission statement or visions and values. And these are all things that kind of make up what a brand is, or what a company like can be, like when kind of can become. But I think it's really critical to think about this from the standpoint that, you know, companies, brands, right? They have very, like they have both a lot of control, but then they also have, you know, Brad, to your point, like they lose a little bit of control about how they're perceived. And so like companies will take a lot of, you know, put a lot of effort, put a lot of resources behind trying to figure out how they can position themselves so that, you know, if I'm a US Steel and I'm selling, you know, tin plated steel to be made into soup cans, you know, the companies that US Steel sells to, like Silgan or Ball or Crown, like they want to be perceived in a certain way. Hopefully it's something about like quality, because you know you have all this pressure from like imports and all these other domestic manufacturers that are manufacturing a similar thing, right? So a company like a steel manufacturer or service center, like they'll develop basically these, we call them like a MasterCard slide, and I'll show you guys what this looks like. But it's this framework that we can use to basically outline like what I want my organization to stand for. And then it helps to drive alignment with like how I operate. And I'll be completely upfront, is that like, especially when I worked in like manufacturing, I didn't really completely buy into a lot of these things up front, because you know, on the day to day, like you're working with like service, and like you're working with like delivery, and you're working with like, you know, like maybe like you know, fuel costs are increasing, and so why should I think about like these like what I would call like fluffy ideas, or these nebulous, or like, you know, these pie in the sky type ideas? And the reason is because customers and consumers are thinking about a lot of these types of things. And so we'll get a little bit deeper into this, but you know, if I'm a flower like store, or if I'm a plumber, or if I'm like you know, like a hardware store or a steel manufacturer, like I'm selling to people that have like problems in their lives, or they have an issue that they're trying to fix. And so if I'm able to help them do that, but then there's something on top of it, like people will come back. And so we talk about this idea of brand architecture, and what a brand architecture helps us
Hey,
do.
Jeff, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Hey, Andy, what's up?
Hey, I was just wondering if I could jump in before you get too deep into it. I wanted to go back to, you know, Brad had mentioned the divisiveness and the political aspect, which plays into the emotion, but I want to go to the different aspect of the emotion with Coca-Cola. You know, while I'm not necessarily a Coca-Cola drinker, I completely and utterly equate it to Christmas. And I think if I remember correctly, it started out as a painting of Santa when they first tried to brand it. And, you know, even though I might not drink it or don't necessarily reach for that, you know, when I get into the emotional aspect of that, it brings up that jolly Santa Claus, really well designed, and then during that whole time period. So when you talk about perception and whatnot, and, you know, for me, I think there's an emotional connection to that. You see you know, I think the playing cards and the different things, the can collections and all that Christmas stuff which really tries to bring in the family perception. So it's sort of the heartwarming connection there.
Yeah, and that's like a really interesting point too, Andy, because like it's funny because like those types of deep connections can last for like generations and generations. And so one thing, like, you know, Coca-Cola is a great example with like the Christmas or like the polar bears. And then you have like an example of like Campbell's Kids, like those like those old commercials. And Andy, I think you're spot on. I'll have to dig around, but I think you're spot on that like the I think it was like the Santa Claus. It was like a campaign that they ran, and it wasn't like intended to be like an extremely long campaign. But then just people, like it resonated with people, and they're like, my gosh, like Coca-Cola equals like togetherness and like friendship and like, you know, Christmas. And it, you know, I guess like the colors like kind of help with that, is like with the red and white. But it's just so interesting how that works. And actually, I promise I didn't pay Andy to say that, but there's this like really interesting idea of like this, we call them distinctive assets. And I'll quickly go over what this brand architecture is. But Andy, one of the things that you're talking about, and it's not exactly this, but it's kind of like in this idea, is like this idea of distinctive assets. And so I'm going to try to grab, actually, you know what? So this is a funny can, because it's actually a steel can. Usually Coca-Cola cans are aluminum now, but I bought this in Spain, so it's a steel can. And so the interesting thing that kind of Andy's hitting on is like, you know, when somebody sees this like flashed up, like these neural networks actually exist. Like they're like things, parts of their brain that are like lighting up, right? And for Andy, it's like going to Christmas. Like for me, it's going to like polar bears. For somebody else, maybe it's going to like like sharing Coke with my best friend, or like maybe like a day down at the river, right? And that's what like that's like the really interesting thing about mostly about advertising, about products in general, is that like when I flash this up, like, and it brings something up into somebody's mind, like that same exact thing happens when people say, hey, like, did you run into Jeff? Hey, did you run into Brody? Hey, did you run into Brad or Andy? Like, or hey, did you go down? And I know from Northeast Pennsylvania, so apologies to anybody who owns a hardware store, but hey, did you go down to Stetson Brothers hardware store? And like, as soon as I hear that name, I think, what does that mean to me, right? And so if you have like a great experience, like that's fantastic. But if you have a bad experience, that's also like not good, right? So I used to work at Stetson Brothers Hardware, and so people would come in and they would, and Brad's probably just having a field day here with like all the Northeast connections, but people would come in and I would not know how to solve their like plumbing problem, right? And so I learned very early on, if I didn't know the answer, don't pretend I knew the answer, because then I'd have a mad person come back and like they'd see my face and like it's like not a brand, but it is kind of a brand. They think, oh my gosh, I don't want to talk to that guy, right? And it's that same stuff that we're talking about. And this idea, though, Andy, that you're hitting on, like we call them distinctive assets. So it could be as simple as like Stetson Brothers Hardware, or like the red and white coloring of like the of their sign. And these are all things that sometimes are even unintentional. So like, but we're able to measure them. And so as a brand like Campbell's, we'll go through all these like these really interesting like pieces of like research where we'll put up like I think I've got a can of soup around here somewhere. So like we'll put this in front of people and they'll say, oh my gosh, like that like is Campbell's. And then we'll just do this where we'll put like the red and white and they'll be like, still Campbell's. And we'll put like this little medallion and they're like, still Campbell's. But we can actually plot that out to know how much it like resonates with them. The important thing with this is that like when we're thinking about like our brand architecture, like I mentioned, like even if I'm not selling something to like an end user, I think there's still a lot of value here, because what we're trying to do, and this is an example, like I'm just making up a soup brand, obviously, because I work at a soup company, but if somebody really wants to be like eating healthy products, like I can make a healthier soup, or not, I don't say a healthier soup. I can make a soup that's like, full of like, different types of ingredients that people like, just really want in their soup, or they want in their recipes. And so I know like these ideas here, I'll run through really quickly because it can get pretty detailed pretty quickly. And one thing I also want to mention, I'll show you guys all my contact info like at the end here. So if you ever want to reach out and talk about this stuff, I'm more than happy to spend like hours and hours just to do it. This brand purpose, I would say company purpose, like what are we here to do? And so like with this example, it's like, want to give people like good food, like want to like empower people to eat well, cultural truths. So these are things, when Andy and Brad, when we're talking about things that are happening like in the world, like more broadly, these are things that Nike was probably thinking through about, like, hey, what's happening in the world that we need to be thinking through. And then these brand truths are like, hey, like we want to stand for XYZ, or we want to like fulfill this this type of like need. And I'm just kind of guessing for Nike, but and then what you're able to do is like, what is our enemy? So like if I own, let's say, like a flower shop, like my enemy could be like, I don't know, like people just buying a flower for the sake of buying a flower without like, feeling good about it. Or like maybe it's, maybe like, I don't know, chocolates are like the enemy or something like that. But all these different areas help us to then align ourselves to like what our company stands for. And again, this is something that you can just draw out on the back of a napkin, like that, that still helps, because everything that we're doing here, when we talk about a tone of voice, if it's like positive or smart, vibrant, what we're basically doing is we're trying to tell ourselves, like, what is my business about? And is the way that I think about my business, like the way that I'm communicating that to the people that like buy my services or products. And so one thing that I'll share with you guys is just like a blank one of these, so that you can like take a stab at it for like for your business. And so like, let's say you work for a big company. Let's say that you're not even in the marketing department. It's still really helpful, like that you can start to think of like, hey, if I worked at Erie Insurance, like what does that stand for? Like what does Erie Insurance do for their customers? And so these are things that we can start to talk about. So I just made one up for a steel company, and I know I'm like really going through this very quickly, but there's just like, it's easy to get bogged down in this stuff. But emotional takeaways, like if I own a steel company, and I want to be thought of as not just a metal company, but maybe let's say like a materials company. And I want to make my customers feel like I'm a good partner to them, or I'm visionary in bringing innovation to the table. Like these are the types of things that that I can start to create. I want to take a quick pause and just, I know I'm like throwing a lot of information at you all, so I want to just like take a quick pause and see if there are any questions about this. We're going to dive more into, I think, some other tools that are like very, very useful and like very easy to like walk through. But again, I know I'm like throwing a lot of stuff at you, and like, not that it's, these I think are really like, easy to work through, but like when I saw it for the first time, my eyes were sort of going everywhere. So I would say that when starting out with these types of things, I think the most important pieces are this brand purpose, and then going to like these emotional takeaways, brand benefit or company benefit, and then these like truths. And one other thing that like I would also say is like, one way I always look at it is like, my company or my brand will never be this. So like if I say like my product truth is to be like best in class service levels, like visionary, innovative, like all those sorts of things, but I will never be just a steel manufacturer. And I think those are things that are important, because as I'm building out like my strategy, or as I'm building out like what, a new product or a new service, or just like even looking at the current, products and services I have, those are things that are like very helpful. So like, let's say I own a bed and breakfast, and it's like, I want to be like, like a very like, let's say like the community centric bed and breakfast that I help people go and explore what's around like the Corey area. And I'll never be just a normal bed and breakfast, or just your run of the mill bed and breakfast where people stay all day long. Like that's an example of how, you can think of that. So it's like sort of juxtaposing like what I aspire to be, and then also like, what I, maybe like some red areas, or some like some other goalposts. So the other piece here that I want to talk about is this idea of a demand landscape. And one of the, like, there are two key pieces of a demand landscape that we'll talk about. And basically all demand landscape is, it's just a way of saying, I have all these consumers, or these different types of consumers, and I have all these different like times or moments in which they buy stuff for a service. And what this demand landscape helps us do is it helps us to understand like where I could be putting my effort. And that could be like marketing effort. So it's like, if you have like an Instagram post, like, if you're paying for a post, you can like target certain types of people. Or let's say that, I have a business where I sell something that people seem to buy like maybe like, I don't know, one time a year, or like during different times of years. What these types of demand landscapes help us do is it helps us figure out like the types of people that are buying something, when they're buying it, so that we can then focus in on areas that we either have like really high traffic or high volume. But it can also help us say, hey, why aren't people buying like flowers like in, I don't know, in July? Like, why don't people buy a lot of flowers like for 4th of July? Like maybe they do, but it can help me start thinking like, interesting, like there are people, they buy balloons, they buy streamers, they buy fireworks. Like what about like red, white, and blue flowers? Like maybe that's something I can like create and market to people that want to have like flower boxes around town. So there are a number of different ways that we look at these things. The one thing I would say about consumer segments is that consumer segments are generally like kind of built around an insight or an idea. So like if I am selling food, there are people that like really healthy food. There are people that like really indulgent food. There are people that are middle of the road. And so those things actually help me to start like figuring out, okay, like these are my different types of consumers. So the interesting thing is like when we talk about like demographics or like psychographics, and like psychographics are basically just like how people perceive things, like their opinions and how they generally think. Those are kind of like like underneath these like insights. So it's like I could have somebody that wants to eat really healthy, and there are people that are like 10 years old that want to eat healthy. There are people that are 100 years old that want to eat healthy. But then again, like these people that want snacks all the time, like again, like you could have like the same, like 100-year-olds or like 10-year-olds. So it's just a way that we're thinking about people, so that we can just start like organizing them into buckets. I'm going to stop real quick. Like any questions about like segments? We'll get into some of these examples, but just want to make sure that like everything's, like if you have any questions, just feel free to either throw it in the chat, or feel free to jump in.
Hey, Jeff.
Hey, what's going on?
Hey, great to see you. So I have a question. It kind of relates to your previous slide and the current slide. So our organization, the Corey Hyatt, I'd say for brand recognition, two things come to mind. First of all, what would you say? Kind of a two-part question.
Yeah.
First of all, for someone who maybe appeal to a certain segment of individuals, there may be a great experience that the individuals that have come and used the Hyatt for education or training or what have you. But there are, and what I have discovered in my time being there is that there is still a very large group of, maybe the majority, I want to say maybe the majority of the population in Corey may not know what we actually do. And so in transferring that, we have a great rapport with those that do use us for education and training services, but there are still many in the community that may not recognize us. So I guess, as far as that goes, there's really the strategic segment for us potentially may be those whom we have served in the past, but maybe I guess the question would be centering around how to grow the brand around a small core of people that do have a great perception of your organization.
Yeah, I just realized this is Brody. Hey, Brody, how's it going? Good to see you, man.
Good to see you.
I recognize the voice, but my screen is set up in a weird way, so I had to scroll through to make sure before I said it. But yeah, I think that's so the question is like basically how to reach out beyond the core. Is that kind of what you're driving at?
Right. In getting past, I know where the Hyatt is located. I know that it's that great big building on Center Street, but I'm not exactly sure what they do there. And that's been kind of a challenge for the organization to get a larger reach, particularly in the workforce area when there are so many industries in town that could be afforded of filling hard to fill positions with so many being open right now. So making that connection there overall to that core of individuals that we have reached and that have had a great experience growing that brand.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think that's also I think that's like an issue that a lot of organizations tend to deal with as well, is that you will have a loyal group of people that compose or comprise a core, and it's man, I'm creating these deep connections with this core group of people, and then if you think of this in terms of concentric circles, outside of that, it is difficult to reach. And so I think actually I'm going to just jump ahead, and this isn't this is going to be a really busy, this is actually probably a really bad example in terms of well, I'll use this example. So the example is not great, Brody, because I'm using this I was just noodling on some ideas before, and this isn't going to completely answer your question, but I think it's going to help to create a framework to think about, right? So what this tool is helping us do is to kind of figure out exactly what you're talking about, and that is to say that you can start developing these different buckets of people, and then figure out are they using other services? Are they using maybe national services? Are they using I don't know, where are they getting their information from as well? So you can start to develop these things, Brody, into figuring out where people exist, where they're getting their information from. Because I guess my question would be do you have a good sense of where do people learn about the organization in general? Is it more so just from word of mouth, or any sort of newspapers, or from social media activation or anything like that?
Yeah, I think what we have attempted to do in order to answer that question is to try to pull some more data to see as far as how individuals were referred to us. So maybe in a program evaluation from individuals attending, how did you hear about us? I would say generally, it would have been from our local newspaper and any of our publications that we put out in print. We've taken a very strong stance in trying to enhance our social media presence over the last year and a half. And I would say that probably is equal to any print media that we've done, but it is quickly getting in front of that at this point in time.
Yeah, this is like it is a difficult nut to crack, just because like you might have folks that are like, I mean, like, I guess one question I would also have is, do the folks that you work with, are they typically like younger, older, like kind of where, like, are they like are they like engaged with like social media and those sorts of things? 'Cause like one thing I'm also wondering is like, um, sometimes traditional media works well with these types of things if people aren't engaging with like a lot of social media, like even like, I mean, I don't know about like billboards or anything like that, but I think that it is, I think, yeah, it is a kind of an interesting question. Where are you finding most of your traffic? So most of your traffic is coming from like those areas that you've already like tried, like the newspapers and like the social media.
I would say that we're at both ends of the spectrum. So the younger appeal to the end of the demographic in which we serve as adult learners potentially is starting to become more engaged with the social media aspect, but not everyone in Corey subscribes to the local paper. And that's traditionally how we get a lot of our information into the hands of those older adults in which we serve. So it's kind of split, and then we're in that gray area. And that's where it becomes, there's a lot of question marks that pop up as far as how do we reach that other demographic rather than those regular customers. And I'm sure a lot of business owners either on the call may have those or otherwise may have those same questions with, oh, well, I have my regulars, but then how do I then grow that out to benefit my business and for others that may be interested in my goods or services?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like, I apologize because I'm, in my mind, I have a tendency to go to solutions mode, but like, so I think the one thing, and I don't want to like also like try to sell this idea here, but like, I think that it sounds like you've already done this analysis as well, Brody, but I think that is why this like type of framework does kind of help, because like you could have like a continuum where like on the left-hand side, you're like, hey, like where this like says love to cook, it could be like highly engaged with like social media and like, let's say media in general. And then when you get to the right-hand side, you can have people that are like less engaged with that. But then you have like, we start to be able to plot out like where the gaps are, so that like, I think one, and I'm not saying this is like necessarily what the approach is, but I think a lot of times when we think of like, how do we reach people, it's almost like a shotgun approach where it's like, let's throw a little bit of everything out there and just see what sticks, versus like figuring out like, okay, if people are like actually engaging with us on social media, like maybe we already have that like under our belt. And like you can spend a little bit more mind share like thinking about like, okay, like for those folks that are like, we're just not reaching. And I'm kind of like, I'm basically just saying back to you the same thing you said to me, is that, like, how do we find them? Like, but if sometimes part of the battle is actually just defining that as being an issue, you know what I mean? And like, part of it's also saying like, hey, let's pat ourselves on the back. Like we've done a good job of reaching these core people. I would also say like, the folks that you are working with, like, have you been engaging with them to like, like not saying like word of mouth, but like, hey, like, do you know somebody that would like need the service, and not so much to refer them, but to say like, where do they where do they get their information from? Like, I'd be interested to like learn more about that, and like more about like, hey, if people are looking for roles, like, are they online? Are they going to like, how are they just using Google? Are they using like, those types of vehicles? Because it is kind of tough, but I think like from a growth standpoint or like a scale standpoint, like this is like kind of a framework that helps to poke into those little areas. I don't know if that's really helpful, Brody, but we could even like chat offline if you want to like have like a session to like brainstorm it, because that's sort of stuff I kind of enjoy talking through.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that.
No problem. Yeah, I would say that to everybody too, is like a lot of this stuff is like super high level. So like if if you have like specific questions, or like you're interested in like talking about how this like impacts your specific organization, like we can talk through that stuff. Because like admittedly, I'm not as like familiar with all the organizations, but like these types of things, like I spend a lot of my time like talking through like these exact type of of like business problems, so to speak. And it's actually really interesting, Brody, because like when we talk about like, I almost have like an opposite problem at Campbell's, which is like so many people know about Campbell's, and the people that don't really engage with the brand are like people that are like super like social media, like very savvy with that stuff. And it's like interesting because like a lot of like people that don't traditionally engage with like those types of things, like they somehow, they've been finding our product for a while. So awareness generation is like a really difficult issue. And like what you're kind of talking about is this idea of like trial and repeat. And like those are the two most important things that we really talk about with like any product or service is like somebody tries it and they repeat. So it's like if you can get 100% repeat, that's like awesome. But if you only have like 4 people, because you can only like reach 4 people, that like becomes like a difficult problem. So I would say like let's like chat about that a little bit because I'd be interested to learn more about like where you guys are advertising, like who you're targeting, like those types of things. But I think there's like definitely a way at it, but it's probably maybe like an hour and a half conversation. But yeah, great question. I guess like real quick, any other questions or comments before we kind of move on? I skipped ahead a little bit just because like I think that this gets into like what Brody's bringing up. I think gets into like a lot of these really like interesting like actually useful stuff. And I'm gonna skip ahead real quick to like this slide, which is I think like one of the most important slides. It's just like this conceptual framework of like who is buying my product and service, like or using my product and service, like what differentiates them from each other, and then like when are they using it. And so like if we go back to like to Brody's like example, like we have like these people, we know that there are certain people who are using the service, right? And so we can start to say like what is different about them than like this other group of people that we can't quite get in front of. And so the other idea here is that like when we think about like when they use our products and services, like this helps us to then just like plot them against like I will go back to a certain example because I think it does like just help bring home like how we think about this. So like Brody, we're talking about like employment services, right?
Somewhat. Anything from earning your GED to post-secondary education. Maybe you need a technical training class for your position at work. Many things to many people as far as the elements of the training aspect that you can get for professionals or for adult students.
Yeah, and so I think like part of this, like I think that's like really helpful to know because like I think like part of this is like if we think about like when or why people like look for like those types of services, I would imagine that like it's probably, I mean, I might be completely wrong, but like maybe it's sort of like seeded by like an unexpected, I'm just kind of using this thing, but like, something that happens, maybe like they're going through like, they want to like explore a different career, or maybe maybe they like got laid off or something like that versus I'd be interested to know like when people are planning to like look for these services versus like it happens a little bit less like planned out. And I think why that's important is because like there are a lot of people that maybe like once like they have a need for that type of like support, like maybe they're just like really quickly running to friends and family, maybe they're really quickly like doing a Google search like more broadly, but like that's why I think it's like really important to talk through like these like very specific examples, because like getting into this idea of like what we call like an insight, it really helps us, it drives us to like why people are doing certain things. And so like I know it kind of seems like very like theoretical, but it really does like help to distill down like how to then like get in front of people. Because let's say they're like, I don't know, like there's like some there's a the economy is doing really well and like unemployment is like really low and people like wages are up. I'm making this like theoretical world. Maybe people aren't quite that's not top of mind. But then like for going into a recession and like people are losing their jobs, like it's more top of mind. And so kind of marrying that up with like what the organizational like mission is and like what it stands for and what it does is actually really helpful to start thinking about like what a media plan could look like. When I say media plan, like I could be as complex as like Facebook, Instagram, like advertising and like newspapers, and it could be as simple as like just like thinking about like who should be like followed and friended on like LinkedIn, or like do I go onto Instagram, or like do I make a LinkedIn page? So those are the sorts of things that like help to create a little bit of like structure with like those types of like business questions. But Brody, I'm pretty sure I failed answering that question, but I know that we could figure some of that out if we sat down for a little bit. So, but anyway, so yeah, these are some of the things. I know I'm getting a little bit long in the in my presentation. So I would say like a couple of steps here when we're creating these things. Like Brody sort of like threw out some of the first steps is just like asking those questions and thinking through like, what is my business problem or what problem am I running up against? And then thinking about who are the people that that I'm trying to serve or sell something to, and like when do they actually need a product or service. And so one thing I would say is that like if you guys are ever, if you're ever thinking through this stuff and you want to just like chat about it, or if you want to just like shoot me a note and like ask a question about how I would maybe think through it. Again, I won't have like a lot of like the answers, but I can help you to sort of set up this framework and start like going maybe in I wouldn't say the right direction, but like maybe a direction that might be helpful to just start throwing some of these things down on paper. So I really appreciate the time and everybody, Aaron and Chuck and everybody. Thanks again for putting this together. I want to like definitely open this up for conversation. If you have any questions about some maybe like an issue that you're working through or anything that might have resonated with you. But again, I really appreciate this opportunity and something that I would love to stay connected with everybody, and feel free to to reach out. I can also like I'll also Aaron, you have like my cell number and stuff like that too that you can pass on to folks if they want to give me a buzz or shoot me a text or anything like that.
Yep, for sure.
So
I
that's
just want to also say that I know not everybody can log on live when we have these sessions, but this is being recorded and we are going to post the session on YouTube. So if you get any questions, Jeff, or emails or calls, even a couple weeks down the road, that's probably why.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, always happy to chat. I am just I'm kind of a nerd when it comes to this stuff, so I don't charge a fee,
So,
just a conversation.
so Jeff, this is Brad again.
Hey, Brad.
I'm also equally nerdy on this kind of stuff because I love it. But I'll tell you just two quick things. One, I saw Wendy Neckers was on here, and Jeff, if you don't know Wendy, she owns this fantastic art gallery in Corey. And I remember, and her branding with the art gallery. But when everybody heard there was an art gallery in Corey, or going to open an art gallery in Corey, it's like, what in the world in Corey, PA, an art gallery? But she has successfully branded herself and marketed to, if you build it, they will come. And if you have good product and good service and doing very well. And so it's just crazy that she's been able to take something like that and a high-end art gallery and have it in Corey, Pennsylvania. And so that in itself is just a story for a book. But I'll talk about my business. I have a little Erie insurance office in Corey and Oil City and Cranberry. And we often talk about branding with our team and the insurance industry in general. And frankly, we are almost our own worst enemy in the insurance world because we have put the perception of price. We've got to be the cheapest price. Geico has convinced everybody, oh, save 15% in 5 minutes, or what, 15 minutes will save you 5% or whatever the deal is. But, that's one thing that, again, back to like Wendy is selling this high-end artwork in Corey, and she's not professing to be the cheapest. And Campbell's Soup never says, hey, we're going to be the cheapest soup out there. I always say Cadillac doesn't portray to be or brag about selling the cheapest cars. And so our branding at our office is, hey, if you want confidence when you have a disaster, in your insurance, if you want confidence in your protection, if you want above all service, us bending over backwards for our customers when they have a claim or when they need something with an insurance card or have an issue or whatever, that's who we want to attract. If you want the absolute cheapest insurance and, hey, just give me the minimum, whatever I need to get my car on the road, we're not their answer. And so we struggle with branding that. And when, again, the insurance world or the insurance industry particularly is our own worst enemy, because we constantly are thinking about price and the premiums and, oh, we have to be cheaper, cheaper, cheaper. And so that's one of the struggles that we are constantly dealing with our branding is, again, internally first, because we have to convince ourselves before we can convince our prospects of it.
That's like such a great example too. Like, and when I think of your insurance, I think of like comfort and like and confidence. I mean, like just what you said. I mean, like, and in my mind, I see like the above, Erie above all insurance. Like, I mean, when I've had like a couple of claims where like I needed your insurance, like they were there. I didn't have to worry about anything, right? It was just like easy, and like it was like the thing about insurance. It's kind of wild is that you don't need it until you need it. You know what I mean? And it's like it's a product and a service. I guess that people. It's an interesting product because like people are almost averse to thinking about it. Like to your point, like they're like a lot of people are very like price sensitive and kind of like shopping on price until you have a situation, right? Until you have a claim, until you need them. I'd actually be interested to see that data is like, if somebody has like, if they change, like insurance providers, like after like, some sort of issue. But and I think the other thing, like, so Wendy, I'm looking forward to stopping by the art gallery next time I drive through, because I do drive through the area quite frequently when I visit my parents and my family in Northwestern PA. But it's really interesting to think of like those types of like, businesses. And I think one of the really cool things is that, I'm showing you guys like, frameworks that like a lot of people like apply without having to like see a framework, right? I mean, it's like a lot of this is just like when you hear of like instinct or business instinct, like these are a lot of the things. And it's really cool because I think that, Brad, to your point, like, putting a spotlight on like Wendy's art gallery, it's really cool because you have people that have like passion. Like I play music, and like I'm trying to start like playing in bands again, and it's like something that I love doing, and it's really cool when you can find you meet people that are able to turn that passion into like into something that they can also like make into a livelihood, which is something that I think is like really awesome, and it's and I mean like it's funny because like I love working at Campbell Soup, but I'm not like I don't wake up every morning and like say I'm gonna go invent like a new soup. I mean, I actually do help invent soups, but like like that's and I love it, but like my passions lie elsewhere. So for me, it's a really cool when those things are able to happen. So Wendy, I'm looking forward to checking out the art gallery. Very cool. Yeah, thanks for the great conversation. I guess I'm available like for as long as people want to stick around, but I don't know if there are any other questions or comments. And Aaron, as you mentioned, if people have follow-ups, feel free to email me or give me a buzz or anything like that.
Yeah, and don't forget, everybody, we have the chat section down here. So if you're in a place where you're not free to talk, go ahead and enter your question or comment in the chat section. I'll give everybody just a couple more minutes to do that, because before I thank Jeff profusely again for being here this evening, I of course just want to give another plug. Coming up, our next third Thursday will be June 17th, and we're going to feature Sarah Merritt, the Director of Pennsylvania Creative Communities at Pennsylvania Council on the Arts. Sarah is going to talk about downtown amenities and art. So everybody join us again for that session. And I'm checking the comments, and I don't see anything right now, Jeff, but thank you so much. I know I got a lot out of this, and thank you everybody for all of your questions. And like I said, we're going to post this on YouTube. So we'll be sending out information where everybody can find that link.
Awesome. Thanks again, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff.
Everybody have a great night. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. I look forward to meeting you. This is Wendy.
Hey, Wendy. Yeah, looking forward to it.
And thank you, Brad. That was a very nice endorsement. I appreciate that.
A nice endorsement that I said I thought you were crazy opening an art gallery in Coors.
Well, you were hardly alone in that. Even my
Yeah,
husband
exactly.
thought I was nuts. But
Exactly.
Jeff, I thoroughly enjoyed this. This was
Oh, thanks so
wonderful.
much. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff.
Bye-bye.
Stop and see us when you're in Corey.
I will definitely be doing that.
Okay, sounds good.
guys.
Take care. Thank you.